Zuckerberg, his people pushed back on the White House and said, this is actually factually accurate. And they had to introduce a new word, which was called malinformation, which is information that is factually accurate, but nevertheless inconvenient to the government. And it was misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And so the Facebook...
Yeah, that's another great point. And as a lawyer, he knows for sure what that's like. That's the way that like lawfare works in this country. You saw it with Trump and all his cases. They tried to take him down in so many different ways, using lawfare. And basically one of the roots of lawfare, and this is big with contract law, is they will, use certain words to make their case that you either did or didn't do something. And language is a big part of it. That's why a lot of times in contracts, you'll see they define words. And, you'll see like clauses where they, or sections where they define words because they have to spell out to the person reading the contract what that word means so that it can't be misinterpreted and then used against them. And another big thing is people will just make up words, right? So a lot of times, people don't realize like words have they play a big role in law. The government or whoever, is somebody who wants to win a court case or is playing the lawfare game, they'll make up words that don't exist and then they'll give it a meaning. They'll assign it a meaning and then they'll add that to the contract or whatever and say, this is what this is. Sometimes you'll see it in terms of services that companies put out, because if they're not happy with the way that the laws are written, they'll just rewrite the language and then create rules around that. And now the government has to go and say, well, that's never existed. We don't even know what that is. So it's not built into our laws because that word didn't exist in the past. So now they have to find out how to work that in and write new laws around those words. This is a game these people play, and it's big with lawyers. They play this game where they manipulate the people by saying, you did this, you did that, but really they're just making up fake words out of thin air, assigning them meanings, and then using it to either skirt around existing laws or create new laws. And he's making a great case right here when he says that they created this malinformation word, which is basically like information that is true, but the government doesn't like it, and they can't say it's false because it's true. So they just basically say it's malinformation, which is this made up thing, this fake idea, fake word. And now we're just going to run on the back of that until the government creates a law saying that you can't do that. And then we'll just make up a new word. And it's this big game back and forth.
And used to censor me, and as does YouTube and Google. And they say, well, we're not doing it with White House approval. We're just doing it because we think it's a public service. And they censor stuff that I say about the war in Ukraine, about a lot of different issues that have nothing to do with countermeasures, medical countermeasures. With Pavel Durov, it's very interesting to watch what happened to him, because why did they arrest him? Yeah. He's arrested, first of all, in France. And of all the countries in Europe, France has robust tradition of freedom of speech, as we have. During the French Revolution, 1789, they passed all these laws just fortifying freedom of speech. And then in the 1880s, they passed another raft of law. And the French are as proud of their tradition of freedom of speech as we are. And so it's funny that they arrest him in France. He touched down. He's a citizen of Abu Dhabi, and he's been thrown out of Russia. And he touched down in France to get gas or fuel for his plane. And what seems clear is that the United States must have pressured Macron to make the arrest, because they come in and tear him off his airplane and then they put him in jail. Why would they do this? The Europeans are already censoring content, so anything they didn't like they can remove. They don't have to arrest him. Not only that, but Abu Dhabi has an extradition treaty with France. Why didn't they just, if they thought he did something wrong, why didn't they just go through the process instead of embarrassing Abu Dhabi and doing this, this dramatic event? And I think probably it's likely that they're censoring him because not because of what he's doing here, but because of what's happening in Russia. Telegram is heavily utilized in Russia, and it's utilized by people who are opposed to the Ukraine war. And it's also used in Ukraine by both sides. And I think it's one of the major reasons that ways that people who are opposed to that war are talking to each other. And I suspect that that was something that the CIA found intolerable. And that NATO, is basically now a CIA subsidiary. And that's probably what's behind it, although nobody can tell, nobody knows. But it's very strange that they did that.
So getting back more to the home front, there's two questions. Let's say you're president. How would you go after NIH, CDC, and all that? What would you do as president? And number two,
what would I?
If you were president right now, what would you do to tone down the CDC?
Okay.
But the second most important question for everybody here is you had a child today. It's exactly as you say. They're a lot of money. I mean, they're a place to put drugs into. How does a parent fight back? Like if you fight from Washington, how does a parent fight back at home against the vaccines? Or how can they stop this?
I mean, the thing is, if you're a parent today, part of the responsibility of being a parent is, unfortunately, is to not trust everything your doctor says and to understand that the medical that doctors have been co-opted by the medical cartel, that the medical schools are now run by pharmaceutical companies, they're funded by them, and that the doctors believe mainly what they're doing. They're also heavily compensated. A typical pediatrician's office makes about 50% of its funding comes from vaccines, not actually from selling the individual vaccines, from the traffic. I mean, when I was a kid, I went to the doctor when I needed stitches, and that's it. And today, every kid goes to the doctor at least 10 times to get their vaccines, and that foot traffic in and out of the office is a major part of the business plan for the pediatrician office. And they're also then rewarded by Blue Cross Blue Shield, which has a reward schedule for pediatricians who vaccinate 80 or 85% of the kids in their office. Get these giant bonuses, I think $40 or $400 per kid, huge amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars that they make, making sure that 85% of the kids are vaccinated. And that's why they throw you out of the office if you fight back. It's not because they care so much about your particular kid. It's that you'll throw off the metrics and you'll lose them their bonuses. And so and those schedules have now been published, so people can actually go look at the Blue Cross Blue Shield schedule, and you can see what your pediatrician is making, and it's huge amounts of money from complying. And so, they have these perverse incentives that make it so that they're not really treating your kid as an individual patient. And so your job in a democracy, in today's democracy, is to do your own research. And that's hard to do, but you need to do it.
Yeah, that's, again, a great point he's making. I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding that everything in life is a business in some degree. Even your local church, right? They make money from people tithing and giving money, and then they use that money however they see fit, whether it's doing a mission trip or putting a new roof on, or whatever they decide. Some churches do the right thing with it, some churches don't, but nonetheless they're a business, right? That's not what church was designed for, but even Christ said tithing is an important thing, and that you should take 10% of your earnings and, tithe with it. So, you know, I'm not saying that it's wrong that everything's a business, but everything is a business. I think a lot of people have hard time understanding that, the schools are a business in America. The medical system, your doctor's office, all that, that's a business. Everything that you know, even your friend, the local mechanic, you go to him for 10 years, you say, hey, can you, help me out with this? And he hits you with the bill and you're like, what? I thought we were friends. It's all a business. Everybody's trying to make money because money is the lifeblood of business. It's what literally keeps the business going. If your business is not making money, you don't have a company. You have a hobby. You have an idea that is, something that you're just doing with your time, but you're not making money, so it's not really a business, right? It's not really a company. But a lot of people put so much faith in their doctors because they just assume the doctor is smarter than them because the doctor went to medical school and they went to school for a long time. And in America, we've built up academics as this really big thing, as though the more degrees you have, the smarter you are, the better you are than other people in America. That's actually a class system. That's not, it's sort of like a class system, but that's not really, that doesn't really mean much in America, right? You could, do the dumbest thing for a living, like look at some of the funny jobs that people have on like HGTV when they're going to buy a home and they like, have like a cricket farm and they somehow have like a $500,000 budget for a house or $1 million budget. You don't need to really be intelligent for that, but they make money, right? We've built up this thing in our minds, especially in America, that if you have more degrees or you're a doctor, you have this title, doctor, lawyer, professor, whatever, somehow you're smarter and better than the other members of the population. That's not the case. But more importantly, the point that he's making, which is very accurate, is that the medical industry has been completely corporatized. He says captured, and I would agree with that to a certain extent, but very corporatized, where the doctors are not free anymore. It's pretty much impossible for anyone to operate on their own today as a doctor and have their own practice outside of any network, right? You'll often see times where doctors are like, or their office or whatever says, oh, we're part of this network, right? Or this, we're actually owned by this company. They're our parent company, right? It's hard to operate on their own independently because everything gets run through the insurance companies. They're the ones that pay the bill. And the people can't afford to pay the doctor what they're worth for that job. But back in the day, doctors would do house visits and they would go to a person's house and they would check on the sick kid and they would maybe give medication if it was needed, or they would just suggest a remedy or some sort of thing that they could do. And then they would get paid, either in cash or whatever. And the doctor would go on his way to the next appointment. And a lot of it was house calls. And then they went to offices where the people came to them so that they can get more people done in a day. But with that comes overhead, right? You have to pay rent. You have to pay for the place, the building, whatever. You have to pay for all that stuff. And it's not like it used to be. It's a business. They're there to make money, right? And they also have a mountain of student loan debt that they had to take out in order to pay for medical school. It's almost always in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So when they get told by the pharmaceutical companies, hey, we will give you this much money for every child you vaccinate, and you grew up going to medical school being taught that vaccines are good and safe, even if new ones come out and you really, really haven't studied them, you're just so conditioned to believe that we make these things with such rigorous trials that they're almost always safe. And if they're not, they don't make it past the final stage to get approved by the CDC or whatever. But, they are just conditioned to think a certain way. So they get told, oh, great, I'll use that money. I'll pay down my debt and then I will, be able to sustain as a doctor. And they get caught up in this cycle. But you're also kind of stuck where you can't pull away and say, no, I'm not doing that, because then you get chastised or they push you out of the network and then you're independent and you can't really, sustain on your own because it's you versus this giant conglomerate. And that's never how medicine was supposed to be, especially in America. There's nothing corporate about health. There shouldn't be. It's just a doctor is really just somebody who is like knowledgeable about how to help you with a health issue that you're having. But we turned it into, in America, this thing where you have to get a degree, you have to have a white coat, you have to do this whole thing. And it's really ridiculous because that never used to be the case. It's just supposed to be somebody who, is more knowledgeable about health and wellness than you. So they give you that information to, fix whatever issue you're having in your life. And they've been completely corporatized in the last 50 years in this country, to where it's even the doctors have a hard time speaking out and stepping away. I mean, look what happened during COVID. There were several doctors who were against COVID and the vaccine and that whole thing, and they got destroyed. A lot of them got fired. They lost their medical license. Some of them actually ended up mysteriously dying somehow. Not saying that for sure somebody killed them, but there's just a lot that went on there the minute doctors decided to stand up and speak out against this stuff, which good for them that they did, but that's what happens when you push back against the machine. So that's the thing. If you see that there's a machine and if you go against it, then you're going to get squished like a bug. You should know that that's evil. That's not good. Nothing like that ever comes from a place of good, right? God doesn't operate like that. Jesus didn't come down here as a god like Zeus with a lightning rod and a staff and beat people and kill them and, all this crazy stuff. He came down as a child, as a baby, born into this world, gentle, fragile. And then as a man, he didn't have any weapons. His only weapons were his words, right? That's God. God is gentle. God is kind. God is loving. If something like that is basically saying, play by our rules or we're going to crush you, that's not coming from a place of good. You should just know that that's evil. All right, that's it for today's video. Definitely check out the links in the show notes and my bio.